From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's podcast, I have my guest and good friend Sam Munoz here, who's the community manager for developer relations at WPEngine with me. And we're going to talk all things WordPress and might even mix in a block thing or two. So sit back, relax, grab a drink, and enjoy the conversation that Sam and I had. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey all, Rob Cairns here. Today I'm here with my guest, Sam Munoz, the community manager at WPEngine for developer relations. How are you today, Sam?
I'm doing super well. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really, really excited to talk about WordPress and all the things we have on the agenda.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in our community right now, to say the least. So, and it's a pleasure to have you. So I thought we'd dive in. And I ask a question I like to ask a lot when I get somebody from WordPress on. What's your WordPress origin story? How did you get into WordPress?
Sure. So back in 2014, that was my first really getting into WordPress. I started a blog with my cousins. It was called DIY Just Cuz. It doesn't exist anymore, so don't go to try to find it. But it was a crafting and like recipe blog, and we were just having fun together, writing things. And I was in Japan and they were in the States, and it was kind of our way to stay connected. And then I was pregnant at the time, so I was, writing about having a baby and all of this fun stuff, right? And we built it on WordPress. And I remember I really enjoyed the process of building the site, kind of tweaking it. I know that we used a Genesis theme, which is just so funny because Brian Gardner, and it's just, I feel like everyone's WordPress story kind of has some touch point in Genesis or StudioPress or something. But anyway, so I really enjoyed like the tinkering part, figuring out the categories and the posts and all that stuff. And then after that, I was like, you know what? I don't like the DIY so much, but I really liked building this website. So I'm going to go make another blog. And then I did a blog about children's books. And I had that for quite a while. And I wrote a book about children's books. And that's, I got really, really into that. And I built a membership site around that. And I was like, wait a second, something is kind of coming up for me with all of this stuff. It's like, it's not so much the content that I'm creating. I really like building the website. So that's when I realized that I loved web development and web design, and WordPress was the only tool that I wanted to use. I tried Squarespace one time to make like a resume site for myself, and I gave up almost instantly. So that's the origin story. And I started as a general engineer. That's what I got my degree in, and then shifted over time into doing this design development and now community management for WordPress.
And you're really good at community management. WPEngine, we were saying before we went to air, I think is really lucky to have you. So I think that
Thank you.
That matters a lot. What's the most challenging part of that job?
Of the community management job?
Yeah.
I think honestly staying on top of all of like the changes and different things that are happening inside of the community, like different acquisitions that are happening, people moving and shifting to either different roles or doing, new businesses. And then WordPress itself just changing all the time. I find myself just trying to stay on top of all of the updates across the community at large is probably the most challenging, but I enjoy that too. Like it's a challenge that I enjoy.
Yeah, and you haven't even talked about the changing aspect of the security side of the business, which we all know is ever changing as well. So you kind of toss that in, and it makes for a busy time for you, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to dive into and talk about a little bit about the changing of how we do things in WordPress. And we all know, going back to the days of StudioPress and Genesis, themes were a big deal. We know there was multiple. There was StudioPress, there was Genesis, there was Headway at the time, if people remember Headway Themes, which is no longer around. And then we after that became the development of the Page Builder and things like Beaver Builder and Elementor. And now we are sort of moving to Gutenberg and full site editing and blocks. How do you feel about the change progression?
Well, I personally think it's great for a few reasons. I'll give a little bit of context too. Like I said, I did have a site. I had several sites, and I also supported people with different sites in like Genesis and StudioPress and more of those like traditional widget style sites, using widgets and custom fields and things like that. But also a large part of the work that I did as a freelancer, I used page builders because I always found that it was easier to pass it off to my clients if they could visually see where they were going to put their content, right? It's like, click on this image block or image module and swap out the image. So to me, this move towards like the block editor and full site editing in the core of WordPress is really exciting because I think it unlocks all of those benefits of page builders without all the extra bloat, without having to have another theme that you're paying for, all of it being inherent into WordPress. So I think it's great, but I do think that everybody's coming from different perspectives. If you're coming from like just building those classic themes and using something like Genesis or whatever, it might be a harder transition. If you're coming from a page builder, it'll be a hard transition too, because it doesn't have all the same features right now that those more robust page builders have. But if you're new to WordPress, this is all you know. So I think that there are challenges in the transition, but ultimately I think that the block editor and full site editing are such a good way to utilize WordPress and allow us to expand beyond just that classic style of building websites.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I know when Gutenberg first came out and it was announced at WordCamp US in December, I guess it's 3 years ago now,
2018. That's when I remember it happening.
And WordCamp Toronto was the weekend before, and they made the announcement they were going to drop it at WordCamp US. And I kind of said, I don't want anywhere near this mess. And part of the reason was at that time, I think it was too early. I really do. That said, and I know I've talked about with you and a couple other people on Twitter, I moved my agency site to blocks back in September last year, over a couple months. And I always joke, I did it on a live site. Please don't do that, people. Like, I had reasons to. I had 150 podcasts posted at the time, so I didn't want to keep podcasts in sync. I did it over time. I did it as an experiment. I decided to go all in with Cadence at the time. So I went in with Cadence and Cadence blocks. That worked out really well. There was a large learning curve, but what I'll say is once you get past that learning curve, if you're a page builder user, I think you'll actually shave times off your site development with things like patterns and reusable blocks, which I use all the time in some of the tools. And then you toss in the speed enhancements. I always say to people, I shaved 10 points on my GT metric score just by moving the blocks. And that is pretty compelling in the days where speed matters for SEO.
Totally. And honestly, I've always been more of a minimalist web developer anyway. I'm like, what is the minimum number of plugins and tools that I can add to this site, because it's easier to maintain for the client. And it's just an easier, more welcoming WordPress dashboard experience anyway. And so having it all built into core and having those speed enhancements and all of that stuff without having to add extra things to make that happen, I think is pretty incredible. And I love that you moved your site as kind of like your test process. I think that that's such a great way to practice, is like build something for yourself, build yourself a new website. If you're, kind of hesitant and nervous about using the block editor, I found it really helpful to focus on just my own website and how can I make this work with blocks. And again, it's like understanding that it's still like an in progress move to the block editor and full site editing. Like everything that we want isn't there yet. And I do think that it can be hard if you're coming from something that's a little bit more robust. Like I was using Divi, and that has, transitions and shadows and borders and, every little granular detail in the UI. So in this case, maybe you have to kind of do like a hybrid approach, right? Like sometimes you're using the user interface for styling, and sometimes you're still using CSS or whatever. But I do think that this is where WordPress is going. And so it's either we move along with the times or we get stuck. And eventually when clients are looking for, quote unquote, modern WordPress projects, they're not going to come to us because we don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's so true. I'll share with you a story about being a minimalist. I don't know if you saw my tweet last week. I had a site I took on. Maybe foolishly now that I look at it, but that's another story. This particular client had his intern install 4 page builders, 3 caching plugins, and 3 form plugins on the same website. And he wonders why it's running slow. And then he's got another, 5 or 6 plugins that are kind of there, but not being used. So I've actually had to do a full site audit, break it down what's not being used. And I went back to him and said, you know what? You'd almost be better off just moving the site to Modern WordPress, as you like to call it, right? Modern WordPress?
Yeah, that's the term we're using.
And move it to Modern WordPress and be done with it. And now I'm in the middle of rebuilding the site in blocks because I don't want to deal with this mess. But talk about not being a minimalist. And, there was a big thread on Twitter about this, and more and more developers are seeing more and more clients doing silly things with their websites, and they wonder why they don't work properly.
Totally. And honestly, like what you're describing to me just sounds like nothing but opportunity, right? Yep. It's like any client or, person that you talk to that has a outdated site, or they're using all these page builders, or they have all these plugins. It's like, it's such a positive to say, hey, we can transition you over to Modern WordPress. We can transition you over to this new version of WordPress that is going to serve you and your business in the long term. And I just think that is an amazing offer that you can, provide to potential clients. So I see it as a great opportunity.
Yeah. And I know your colleague, Brian Gardner, does. He talks about this constantly as being a gold rush time for WordPress developers and designers. And I tend to agree with Brian. I mean, we're in a real interesting time right now. And with the economy being the way it is, with people still not fully being out there with everything going on coming out of a pandemic, I think this has got opportunity written all over it, Sam. I really do.
100%. So that's why I see this all positively, honestly.
No, I agree. And there's some trends that have changed. Like, 2 trends that I see a lot in websites is one, truthfully, comments on websites, unless it's a big media site, don't have a lot of value anymore. So Those comments tend to happen on social media more than they do on the website. So I actually don't even turn comments on anymore. And the other trend, and I was talking about it recently, is I don't think share buttons have a lot of impact on a website because too many people are using browser-based share tools. So I do. I use a browser extension that lets me share any site I'm on or any article to Twitter, Facebook. So I don't think share buttons have a lot of impact anymore, believe it or not.
That's true. I mean, normally if I'm sharing something, I just take the URL and, write my post inside of the actual tool. Like if I want to share it on Twitter, I don't click the Twitter share. I go take the URL and post it in Twitter and format it the way that I want it to look.
Yeah. So we're also getting into the aspect of FSE, full site editing. Where do you see FSE going?
I mean, same thing. I think that so here's the thing. I think that the block editor feels like it's much more out of the beta phase and it's more production ready. I think that there's still some full site editing stuff that needs to be figured out, specifically the user interface side of it for the actual development portion. I think things aren't quite in the places that make sense yet. And that's just it requires a little bit of time for people to adapt it, but it also requires user feedback to say, oh, okay, this makes sense that this, shouldn't be here or whatever. But I think that the powers of it are really, really cool. If you think about things like page templates and being able to, change. I just remember having to write so much code in order to achieve what full site editing can achieve with an interface. And that is really exciting for like low or no code builders, if you will.
Yeah. And I actually wish it's funny. We talk about the block editor. We talk about blocks and FSC. I wish a couple of things would happen. One, maybe somebody should look at the dashboard and do a refresh. I think the dashboard's looking a little old and tired at this point with all these changes going in, personally. And I think the other spot, and I'm probably not the only one to say this, is the media library. The media library hasn't been touched in WordPress in years and years and years. And to me, there's so much that could be done there. There's a better way of filing. There's a better way of searching. There's a better interface that could be used. I think the media library needs some work. Just a little.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I've got a client site that has tons of pages. This is more from a page and like organization perspective. And I mean, it's a membership site and there's all these different programs and things. And finally, I was like, we need some sort of folder system back here. And there's a plugin for that. But that's something that I think would be great to have in core, like folders or just, different organization, especially if, WordPress is like it started off as like this amazing blogging platform, right? So it's like so much about the content and the organization and the taxonomies and things. And I think that if that was extended to the back end, that would make the whole process of being in there just a lot more seamless. But I agree with you in terms of the look and feel. I hope that there is some movement happening. I know that I read something on the Make WordPress site, and I'll see if I can find the post for it at some point and share it on Twitter. But it was about some enhancements just to kind of bring together the site editor experience and the regular dashboard so that it feels a little bit more seamless and less like you're jumping from one website to another.
That's so true. And it's amazing. I mean, as a product that started as a blog platform, what are we building on it? We're building WooCommerce stores. We're building membership. We're building membership sites. We're building learning sites. I just finished, and I know one of your questions you'll like to ask on Twitter is, what are you building today? And I think I was talking to you, I was building a membership portal for clients, and I finished that portal. The biggest job with the portal wasn't building the portal; it was getting the data in the portal. But that's
always.
Story. So I've now moved my clients back from a non-WordPress portal to a WordPress portal, which I control, which I much rather prefer with all the privacy stuff going on and things like that. Who would have figured we'd be running add-ons like full email marketing, which is possible with either Fluent CRM or Groundhog right from inside your WordPress dashboard? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on for this little itsy-bitsy product that started off as a blogging platform.
Totally. I mean, my biggest projects in my freelance business were like full membership or course portals. And it's like this was my big selling point, right? Is like we could use something like Kajabi or Teachable, and those things are great because they are like all-in-one solutions. It's very easy to get started. You don't have to worry about a lot of the details. But if we want to like fully customize this and create like an actual like full experience and have interesting features and have, people able to do all these crazy things inside of this, WordPress is the tool. And it is amazing, like where it has come from to where it is now. And honestly, I think things like the block editor and full site editing make those more interesting projects a little bit easier to design so that you can focus on the functionality component. Because I know, in one of the conversations that Brian and I were having with freelancers, there was some concern about like, well, I have all these skills that I've cultivated. So is something like the block editor or full site editing actually diminishing those skills and making them less valuable because people can like go in and visually create this stuff? And I would say that it just makes that process a little bit more streamlined so that you can focus on the more intricate, interesting stuff that does allow you to still, charge a lot for your work. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it sure does. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm working on a site right now for a gentleman who sells services, and he's moving to the Modern WordPress. And I have been able, because of the block editor, because of reusable blocks, because of things that I know in the editor, I've actually cut my development time down by 50%. But what I can also
so great.
What I can also tell you is I haven't cut down the cost to the client by 50%. So
no, because you're still delivering the same amazing product at the end. It just means that your process gets to be more streamlined, which ultimately means that you either save time or you get to make more money, or both.
Yep, so true. And one of the things I'll say is, and I already touched on, was reusable blocks. The fact that they're global. And a good use for them is on my site at the bottom of every blog post, I have a subscribe to podcast section. And I've changed that a couple times, where at times I've had a call to action in there. At times I've had something else in there. And the beauty of reusable blocks is I changed the master block and it replicates right through the whole website, and it's done. I don't have to change 100 blog posts or 200 blog posts, or it's just taking care of for me. And that, to me, is the gold time saver right there.
Oh, yeah. I also like that you can copy and paste blocks and patterns and things from other sites. Like, that is amazing.
Yeah, I've done a couple of those as well. And there are sites out there with patterns that are free for the using to make your life easier. So, I mean, I would check those out.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, of course.
Okay, cool. Because I know that security is such a big part of the podcast and all the things that you talk about and things, right?
Yep.
So do you think that because of having more functionality in the core of WordPress, that actually makes, like, you have to install less plugins, you have to install less tools, so that's better for security overall?
I would say so. I would also say the key with security, a lot of people say, what's the biggest thing with security? And honestly, a lot of it's common sense. Do you have a backup? Does the backup work properly? Have you tested that backup before you need it to make sure you can actually use it?
Nobody does that.
I do, because I come from an enterprise background. And then
sure. I mean, I do it, but
enterprise server background. Do you have a security provider that you trust? So I make no bones. My security provider of trust is PatchStack. I know the team up there pretty well. They're who I use as a security plugin. Do you have a host like WPEngine, like GoDaddy, like Cloudways, like any of the major hosts that do security in layers? And do you trust what your host is doing? That's another key factor. There are some hosts that don't do a good job. Do you keep proper backups offline for a period? I normally keep backups for 3 months for all my client sites. And the reason for that is sometimes you got to go back more than a month. But in terms of plugins, I would say the less plugins you have to update, the better you are, because you're not going to miss one. And then from a speed factor, more plugins slow down the site.
Totally.
So you've got a couple things going on there. And I think a lot of security comes back to trust, Sam. Who do you trust? And where do you trust your eggs? I'm at the point right now where I'm managing over 300 sites from a security standpoint. And,
wow.
And that's a lot. And it's probably, for me, it's probably about 75% of what I do. I mean, I do development, but that's 75% of what I do right now.
That is awesome.
So you just got to do it, and you got to take it seriously. Because what I'm going to tell you is the small business owner is not going to DIY their security. It's not going to happen. It's going to be unsecure before you know it. And that's an issue. So great question, actually. I think we just got to keep working that side of it. And I think we're getting better. Now, the other thing we got to be careful of, too, is WordPress is not openly unsecure because it's open source. That discussion's been out there, too. But, I think we just got to keep working it. I wanted to jump into the community a little bit. You're a community relations manager, and this kind of hit a sore point on Twitter last week, and it's been a sore point with myself and a number of other high-end community people. Why do people who work in WordPress have to criticize the product so bad, and then they continue to make their money on the product?
Ooh, you mean criticize WordPress?
Yes.
I don't know. I truly don't. I think that, it's so funny that you asked this question, because I was just writing a blog post for the WP Minute. And it was about how I took WordPress for granted, really, when I first started my business. And this was purely from an ignorance standpoint. I didn't really understand the community behind WordPress. I didn't understand that it was open source and what that really meant. I was coming at it from like the entrepreneurial world. That's where I was coming at WordPress from. Everyone was like, use WordPress, whatever, right? So I wasn't thinking about it as a tool and like all of those other things. So I remember complaining about things like, oh my gosh, this core update broke all my client sites. Now I have to spend all this time doing this. I spent a lot of my time seeing WordPress as like an adversary, and I just like had to use it because that's what my business was based off of. But now being more plugged in, I fully understand like what is involved in making WordPress happen, what is involved with maintaining it and growing it and, adding new features. So I don't know why people spend so much time complaining. I think that, if you find a bug, let's say, or there's an impediment to your design in FSE or with the block editor or whatever, that's why things like the Gutenberg GitHub repository and all that stuff exists, so that you can go in and open an issue and say, hey, I found this bug, or I like this feature, and be a part of moving it forward, instead of, standing in your little corner of the internet complaining about it, when, like you said, we're all benefiting from it, right? We all make money from WordPress in some way or another. It's a part of our livelihood. So I don't know why people tear down WordPress.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, you mentioned you can open a ticket, and I know, and the dev advocates are going to hate me by the time I'm done, but I know people like Brian Gardner, Nick Diego on your team. I know Courtney Robertson on the GoDaddy team. I know Birgit Polly Hack up at Automatic. I know Ann McCarthy up at Automatic. Hey, guys, have said, if you don't know how to open a ticket, reach out to us. We'll help you. We'll help you open that ticket, because we want them open. So, there's a number of people, but there's even more advocates out there that will help you. So if you don't know how to open that ticket, reach out to somebody and say, hey, I need some help here. I'd like to open a ticket. I found a problem, instead of just complaining about it.
That's the thing, right? Is like, we could just sit around and complain and say that we wish things were better. But it's like, if you have the skills to make it better, certainly like spending some time contributing back to WordPress is a great idea. But also, if you don't have the skills, at the very least, making people aware that it is an issue or a feature you'd like to see to the people that can actually make that change, I think is so much more valuable and useful in terms of your time. And again, like, it's almost like having gratitude for the tool that is allowing us to have these amazing businesses and, offer these services and things, like, because WordPress is open source. So if no one is working on it, it could just disappear. Yeah. And, that's important to remember.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great people in our community. I mean, we were talking, and I look at the people I know and the people I collaborate with and the people I can reach out to, and I'm not just in the WordPress community, because I'm also a marketer. So I'm, in some of those communities as well. And I think what keeps me using WordPress, truthfully, is the community. We have a pretty strong community, and that's important.
It is so great. Again, like, I was not plugged into this community at all. I had a few friends that were, using WordPress and things, but I was really coming at everything from a business standpoint. I think that was really valuable. And I think it brings something to the community, certainly. But now that I'm here, I'm just like, this is amazing. It's so collaborative. And I think that across the board, like, I've always preached from a business perspective, like, there is enough room at the table for everyone. Even if we all received 100 inquiries to build a website tomorrow, we couldn't accept them anyway, right? Like, I can't build 100 websites by tomorrow. So there is enough space for everyone to be in WordPress and to be building websites, or to be doing, retainer work, whatever. Like, we don't have to compete. We can collaborate. I don't really see people as competitors in like the freelance business. I see them as, referral partners. It's
so true. And that's what makes this community different, is you'll get two designers that will sit down and have a conversation and say, how do we do stuff? And they're both going at the same amount of work. And there's a lot of areas of business. You just don't see that. And I know some of it happens, but I also know some of it doesn't happen. So it's a big difference on that. And that makes it special. And we have people at different angles. Like you were saying, you were recording or writing a blog post for the WP Minute. Matt Maduros is somebody who's been actively involved in this community for years and years. And Matt doesn't do a lot of design development work anymore. He's basically a podcaster. And then you've got a friend, Bob Dunn or Nathan Wrigley, and they're both active in this community. They're basically podcasters at this point. So there's all kinds of ways that people can give into the community. It doesn't have to necessarily be design or development work.
Yeah, for sure. And I was talking about this on Twitter recently, like those no code or low code contributions to whether it be to like WordPress, the project, or WordPress, the ecosystem, it's valuable. Teaching new people how to use WordPress on something like Make WordPress or the learn.wordpress. Yeah, that is so powerful and important because then we add new people into the ecosystem. And when we have more people and it just continues to grow. I mean, WordPress is like 42% of the internet, right? At this current recording. And I don't know. I just think that that's amazing. And there's so much room to grow in so many different areas. And if we think about it from that perspective and think about all the possibilities and opportunities, we don't have to spend so much time in the complaining area because we can see what is abundantly in front of us.
Yeah, I agree with it. I think, I was thinking about this morning and before we went to record around my own life. And I think people just naturally are wired that it's easier to complain about life or anything than talk about something good about it. And I think you're a lot better off mentally when you talk about the good and what's going on instead of all the negative stuff. So I think people need to get back to, talking about all the good stuff. And that's hard right now. There's a lot going on in the world.
That's very true. Exactly. But yeah, to your point, it's like if we spend all this time focusing on the negative, then we never get to see what's possible. And it is kind of somewhat easier to stay subject to, I can't do this because of the block editor. And like, it doesn't have this feature. And like, that can almost become an excuse to not moving forward. Whereas if you're just like, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to do this, this new thing, and I'm going to learn it. I'm going to spend some time doing that. Pretty powerful what could happen.
Yeah, and what I would suggest is honestly, choose a project that's going to mean something. Don't take and spin up a dev site, which we all do, and say, I'm going to try this piece of code. I don't think you get the same learning out of it than take a project and say, I know this is going to take me double what it should, but I'm going to treat it as a learning expedition and then go and learn something and do it for real. I think that makes one of the reasons I did mine on a live site. To be fair. And you'll thank yourself for it, and you'll say, oh, I'm frustrated, and you'll say, oh crap. And I know when I was doing mine, I was reaching out to several people, Brian, Nick, Birgit, and saying, hey guys, I'm stuck, I'm frustrated. And they'd say, keep going with it because you'll be better off. And there's no question I'm better off. So
great advice.
Opportunity. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I remember learning new skills in WordPress early on. I remember having to learn how to do things with membership sites and custom post types and ACF, et cetera. And I loved when I was learning while I was working on a project because I was getting paid basically getting paid to practice, paid to learn.
So, Sam, we were saying you like to get paid to learn something new. And I know Brian sort of said, Gardner said, take 5% of your time and learn something new. And I think people have to incorporate learning into what they do in their business. Don't you think?
I do think so. It's an investment back into your business. And one thing that I like to tell people about, your services and charging more and like making the kind of money that you want is there is value in your expertise, right? And so when we're pricing our work, I like to refer to it as value-based pricing. We're pricing it on the value that the client is going to receive at the end. And so if we're constantly reinvesting time into learning and growing in our craft and our expertise, it's only going to benefit our client, which in turn is going to benefit our businesses and, the amount of money that we can make doing these projects because we are offering a higher level of service. So if you think about it that way, then spending that extra hour a week or whatever you can fit in becomes a lot more meaningful and a lot more doable, because you're like, okay, this is actually going to result in more money, more time, whatever.
Yeah, one of the tricks I like to do, I don't know if you know this, I'm an avid reader. So I take an hour a day and I read a book. And by the way, that's not an ebook. That's not a Kindle book. That's a physical book. And
a physical book reader. I love it.
I have a large book library. And everybody says to me, how do you find an hour a day to read a book? And I said, simple. Take that hour out of watching TV every day. Just an hour a day before bed. That's how I unwind every night. And 9 out of 10 times the book in my hand is a business book, a marketing book, a design book, and I'm learning something while I read. And if you do that and you do an hour a day, you will get through roughly a book a week. There are some weeks it doesn't happen, but generally as a rule. Last year in 2021, I read 46 books.
That is amazing.
And that doesn't count the Kindle and ebooks I read. So I think you got to kind of choose. And then the other way to learn, honestly, is take a little bit of time, jump on some webinars like the type you do with Brian or somebody else does at another company, and choose very carefully what you're learning from, but listen to some other opinions, because my other theory is you don't want to learn from one person, because then you get a tunnel vision opinion out there. So you're better off to learn from a couple sources.
That is great advice. I love that. And I like that incremental approach too, right? It's like no one's asking you to sit down for the next 3 days and do nothing but learn full site editing, right? It's like just take it in an incremental approach and you just fit it in when you can. And eventually you will learn the skills. And I think that idea of like having multiple trusted sources is also beneficial, but with the caveat that like not too much information, right? So maybe pick like 3 or 4 people to listen to, check out fullsiteediting.com, go to a social learning space, which I think is now called like an online workshop or something, but check out the different resources, find the few people that you enjoy their learning or their teaching style and you learn well from, and then invest that time back in. I know that I take a similar approach to building like large projects and large websites, especially like a big, robust membership site, right? I like break it up into all these like smaller pieces, and then I will spend like a little chunk of time every day working on it, because otherwise what ends up happening is it's like 2 weeks before it's due and supposed to be live, and you're like shoving it all in. And that's way stressful compared to just like slowly chipping away at it, because that hour put in is 1 hour less time to work on the project. So you can kind of think about it that way in terms of learning as well.
Yeah, and then the third thing I throw out there is, if you're going to learn from somebody, find somebody smarter than you. And I mean that. I have a mentor. His name is Paul Toby. Paul, for interest's sake, is the father of Adrian Toby, who's the founder of Groundhog. And Paul used to run a digital marketing agency. And one time I went and learned some stuff from Paul, because I consider myself pretty smart, but I consider Paul more knowledgeable in some areas than I'm in. So, if go and learn from somebody who's got different knowledge base or smarter than you, that helps as well. So.
Yes. I also want to kind of address this other aspect of this, which is, and I feel this too. It's like, if you've been doing this for a while, this idea of learning something new is like, I don't want to. I like, you have like pride around what you know, right? You're like, I've been doing this for 5-10 years. I know how to build a website. I don't need to like go out and learn this new thing. And there is a lot of resistance. Did you feel that at all? Yeah, I know I did.
There is, but I've always been a lifelong learner. My father, when he was alive before he died, was a lifelong learner. And so for me, it's never been an issue. I carry 2 college diplomas, but I also carry 14 professional designations after my name, which I usually don't put there. So I'm always learning something. So for me, that hasn't been as much an issue as a lot of people.
I have heard that from people though, just like, I know how to do my thing. I don't want to learn something new. Especially if they're maybe an agency owner or something, it's like my whole team does it this way. And now you're telling me I have to learn this new thing and teach a team and redo all of my systems. Like, if you think about it in that way, yeah, it can be like demoralizing. But if you think about it in terms of all the opportunity, like you said, time saved, being able to repeat things using reusable blocks, all of the advantages, then that, spending that hour or two a day learning and adapting and kind of transitioning over, it is in the long run more beneficial. I like to think about it too, about, like planning my day, for example. Maybe I spend like an hour planning out my day or my week, and it takes a bit of time there and like some upfront thinking, maybe I'm planning my meals or whatever. And so it's like, I have to put in the time at the beginning, but then the benefits throughout the rest of the week are just enormous. So it's the same kind of concept with your business and investing time to learn this new thing and all of that. It's like, it might take a little bit of work up front, but the benefit is going to serve you in the long run.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, that's the resistance of moving to the modern WordPress is people don't want to take in the time at the agency level to do the learning. So they're all fighting it, saying this isn't good because, frankly, they have a way of doing things and they don't want to change that. And I think what's really going to impact that is I think some of the page builders are, frankly, going to go away eventually. So
I agree.
I personally think Beaver Builder and Elementor will come out somehow out of the top, no matter what happens. But I kind of look at what's going on with Oxygen right now. Mm-hmm. And in order to make money, what have they done? They've made a second page builder. and
yeah.
talk about, I'm sorry, but thumbing your nose at your clients. And Oxygen was one of these companies that decided to offer a lifetime deal and keep offering, which I think is a mistake in the space to start with. But
sure.
And then they're throwing a second page builder in to say, oh, by the way, this isn't the same product. So if you want it, you got to buy it. I mean, I don't think, first of all, from a business standpoint, that's really good. From an ethical standpoint, I'm not sure it's good. And then I kind of look at what's going on and saying, okay, so you're probably going to go out the window. And then some of the other page builders I think are going to go as well sooner or later.
I agree with you. I'm expecting either, page builders to go away completely or turn into some sort of like hosting thing on their own. Something like Show It, which I think is built on WordPress, and is essentially like a builder of sorts. But I could see that happening, but I could definitely see them just going away because again, it's like once the core of WordPress catches up with all of those, especially from like an appearance standpoint, right? Being able to do like translations and rotating things and adding shadows and borders like more intricately, changing border styles, etc. Like what is the use of a page builder anymore?
That is so true. And you mentioned something interesting. We're sort of talking about acquisition. So I'll jump in on this topic a little bit. I think where you're going to see most of the acquisitions going is honestly hosting companies. And WPEngine just jumped into that, buying ACF recently, right? And a couple other tools from Delicious Brains. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. We saw Newfold buying Yith, and they bought Yoast. We've seen Liquid Web in the mess with the Stellar WP brand and some of the plugins they've bought. We've seen GoDaddy in it with them and their purchases and purchasing Pagely as well. So we've seen a lot of that going on. And I think where it's going to come down to is what's going to happen is you're not going to choose your host just from a support standpoint. You're going to choose the host eventually by saying, okay, and what plugins are you giving me that I don't have to buy as part of the package?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of benefits to that, honestly, because there's like big teams around it and lots of support and infrastructure that honestly, I think serves the client better in the long run.
Yeah. And too many people in the hosting game, and you know this and I know this, what are they doing? How do I find a host for $2 a month? How do I find a host for $3 a month?
Right.
And then they wonder why at the end of the day, they're not being served, they're not being looked after, and they're not being helped. I mean,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I personally switched all of my sites in, mid 2018 to Flywheel. As soon as I found out about them, I was like, this is amazing. And I've never looked back. And then when they were acquired by WPEngine, I was like, this is great. So yeah, I think, paying for hosting is so valuable. That's like number one thing I would do with clients is like, what is your host? Okay, we're going to move you to a better host. Like that's step one.
Yep. You have to build the foundation before you build the 10th floor, right?
Totally. Yes, exactly. And I get it. Like it can seem like, oh, well, now this is like $20 a month, but in the grand scheme of your business, like really, if we're thinking like something that's secure and has backups and all of these other things, like it is worth it.
Yep. Sam, thanks so much. If you have one more big WordPress tip, do you have one? Or?
Oh man. I mean, I guess I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. If you're looking to get started with full site editing and stuff like that, I loved your idea of like doing it on a client project. But if you're nervous about that, try changing your own website over to blocks and just play with it and just spend some time in that. And if you feel nervous, reach out to someone like me at Hello Sam Munoz on Twitter, or Brian Gardner, or Nick Diego, Damon Cook, anyone. I mean, even you, Rob, right? Like
yep.
People that are already in that space and just can give you that nudge and say, hey, it's not as hard and scary as you think it is. I think the having time and space with biz besties, as I liked to call it, can be really helpful and make you feel, not so alone. And that's what the WordPress community is about. It is the community. It is other people that are doing the same thing alongside you.
Love it, Sam. Thanks for your time, and you have an amazing day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. This episode of the SDM Show was sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Sam for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation with Sam as much as I did having it with her. Thanks, Sam. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.